On the morning of my daughter's birthday, I stood in the hallway of my own home and listened to my son-in-law tell someone on the phone that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. He said it calmly, the way a man does when he has rehearsed the lie so many times it has started to feel like the truth. By the time he and my daughter came back from their weekend trip to celebrate, the house they had been counting on was already gone. I want to tell you how that happened. My name is Robert Hale. I am 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a senior investigator for a regional insurance company in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a polite way of saying I spent 3 decades catching people who thought they were smarter than they were. Staged car accidents, falsified medical claims, arson dressed up to look like electrical fires. I learned early that fraud is not the product of genius. It is the product of impatience, and impatient people always leave threads. You just have to find the first one and pull. I retired 4 years ago, the spring after my wife Maggie passed. She had been sick for 2 years, and when she was gone, the house on Clover Ridge Lane felt like a building I no longer recognized. We had bought it in 1989. A craftsman bungalow with wide front steps and a porch swing we never quite got around to replacing. Maggie had painted the front door herself a deep, particular shade of blue. She called the color of a lake at 5 in the morning. The hardware store had mixed it special. When she was gone, I used to sit on that porch in the evenings just to look at that door, because it was the last decision she had made about this house, and I was not ready to let it go. My daughter Angela and her husband Derek moved in 8 months after the funeral. It was Angela's idea, she said, because she was worried about me rattling around alone in a 4-bedroom house. Derek agreed with an enthusiasm that I noted, but did not examine too closely at the time. I was grieving. I was grateful for the company. I told myself that the way Derek looked at the house, measuring, assessing, calculating, was just the natural curiosity of a man who had grown up in an apartment. I told myself a lot of things that year that I have since stopped believing. Derek sold corporate real estate. He was good at it, or had been. He was the kind of man who filled a room with his own confidence, and then waited for everyone else to confirm what he already knew about himself. Angela had married him 10 years ago in the backyard of this very house, under the oak tree Maggie and I had planted the year Angela was born. I had watched him say his vows in the shade of that tree and believed, the way fathers do, that the love on his face was sufficient proof of character. I know better now. The first sign I missed was the mail. Derek had offered, helpfully, to manage the household correspondence. He said it would take the burden off me, that I should be resting, enjoying retirement. I let him. For 3 months, I let him sort through envelopes I never opened, forward bills he said he was handling, and intercept communications I never thought to ask about. This was my first mistake. After 32 years in fraud investigation, I had forgotten the most basic rule of my own profession. Trust is not a feeling. It is something you verify. I found out about the loan the way I find out about most things, by accident, and then by not letting go of what I found. I was looking for a coupon book Maggie had kept in the kitchen drawer, the spiral-bound kind she filled with recipes clipped from magazines. I never cooked from it. I just liked to hold it. In the back of that drawer, beneath a rubber band and a dead flashlight battery, I found an envelope from a lender I did not recognize. The return address was a company called Midwest Capital Solutions. The postmark was 4 months old. I stood at the kitchen counter and opened it. Inside was a statement of account for something called a home equity conversion agreement, the formal name for a reverse mortgage. The account was in my name. The property listed was 414 Clover Ridge Lane, Nashville, Tennessee. My home. The outstanding balance was $94,000. I folded the letter. I put it in my shirt pocket. I went back to the living room and picked up the book I had been pretending to read, and I sat there until Derek came home from the gym and asked me how my day had been. I told him it had been quiet. He said that was good. He went upstairs and I sat there with $94,000 in my breast pocket, and I made the decision that would change everything. I did not confront him. That is the thing people do not understand about the work I used to do. Confrontation feels satisfying, but it accomplishes nothing except alerting the subject that you are on to them. The moment Derek knew I had found that letter, he would cover his tracks, move money, construct a story, and prepare Angela to validate it. I had seen it 100 times. Impatient people panic beautifully when they are cornered, but I was not going to corner him yet. I was going to watch. I started that same evening. I retrieved my old professional habits the way you retrieve a tool from a dusty shelf. A little stiff at first, then steady. I found the account number on the statement and spent the next morning on the phone, working my way through the lender's customer service line with the particular patience of a man who has nowhere urgent to be. By the third call, I had located the originating branch. I explained, slowly, carefully, in the voice of a mildly confused older gentleman, that I seemed to have misplaced my loan documents, and could they please email me a copy for my records. They were happy to help. The documents arrived in my email within the hour. I opened them on my laptop, with the door to my study closed and the sound of Angela making lunch audible from the kitchen. My signature was on every page. I knew it was not mine before I had finished the first line. The loop on my capital R has a small horizontal tail at the base, a habit I developed as a young man copying my father's penmanship. I have signed my name the same way for 40 years. This signature had no tail. The letters were careful, clean, and utterly wrong. It was the work of someone who had studied my signature long enough to reproduce the general shape, but had never understood that a signature is not a picture. It is a reflex. You cannot copy a reflex. I sat very still for a long moment. Outside my window, 2 sparrows were arguing over something in the bird feeder Maggie had hung from the oak branch the year before she got sick. She had painted it herself the same blue as the front door, because she said birds deserved beautiful things too. I picked up my phone and called Frank Bauer. Frank and I had worked together for 11 years before he left the insurance world and went to law school at 43, which everyone told him was crazy and which he proved was the best decision of his adult life. He had a small practice on the east side of Nashville now, mostly estate law and elder affairs, which was exactly what I needed. His phone rang twice before he picked up. "Frank," I said. "It's Robert Hale." Robert. His voice carried the particular warmth of a man who remembers where he came from. "How long has it been? You still on Clover Ridge? That's actually why I'm calling. I need your professional opinion on something. And Frank, I need you to understand that this is not a casual call. This is a case." There was a brief silence. When he spoke again, the warmth was still there, but underneath it was the quiet sharpness I recognized from years of sitting across from him in conference rooms. "Tell me everything." I did. I kept my voice level and factual, the way I had been trained to do. I described the loan document, the forged signature, the timeline. I described Derek's behavior over the past 8 months, the mail management, the subtle financial questions he had asked me about the house's value. I told Frank about the statement showing $94,000 already drawn against the equity of my home. When I finished, there was a longer silence. "Robert," Frank said carefully, "do you understand what you're describing? This is not a civil matter. A forged signature on a lending document is wire fraud at the federal level. And because of your age, there's an elder financial abuse enhancement under Tennessee law. We're talking serious criminal exposure." "I know what I'm describing," I said. "I spent 3 decades describing exactly this kind of thing to prosecutors. What I need from you right now is not a lecture on the severity. What I need is a strategy." He let out a long breath. "All right. First, we protect the asset, the house." "I'm ahead of you," I said. I had already spent an hour on the county assessor's website the night before, reviewing my options. 32 years of fraud investigation teaches you to think about legal structures the way a chess player thinks about the board. Not just the piece you are moving, but the pieces you are protecting. I had a plan. I needed Frank to execute it. Over the next 2 weeks, while Angela made dinners and Derek came and went with the breezy confidence of a man who believes his plan is working, I quietly built my case. Frank filed the necessary paperwork to establish an irrevocable trust in Maggie's name, naming our local community foundation as the ultimate beneficiary. The house was transferred into the trust with clean, legal, unambiguous title. From that moment forward, neither Derek nor Angela nor anyone else could touch it without my consent. The asset was gone from their reach before they knew they had been outmaneuvered. Simultaneously, I spent my mornings in my study reconstructing the financial trail. This part I did not need Frank for. This was the work of my life. I requested my full credit report through the official channels and found, in addition to the reverse mortgage, 2 hard inquiries from a credit card company I had never heard of. I followed those to their source and discovered that Derek had applied for cards in my name using an address in Brentwood, not our address. A post office box I could not trace to any business. The combined credit limit on those cards was $22,000. The balance was $21,800. Every dollar had been spent over 6 months. Restaurant charges, hotel stays, a transaction from an establishment in Memphis I recognized from investigative reports as being adjacent to a casino district. Derek had a gambling problem. He was in debt, and he was using my name and my house to buy himself time. I built a file the way I had built 100 files before. Every document scanned and labeled. Every transaction cross-referenced against dates. I found the receipt signature on the BMW lease documents Angela had mentioned casually, saying Derek had gotten a great deal on a company car. The signature was mine, or rather, it was the same false version of mine that appeared on the loan paperwork. I found a utility transfer document, an attempt to shift one of my accounts to a different billing address that had fortunately been rejected by the company due to a failed verification. They had tried. They had been sloppy. Sloppy people leave more threads than they realize. I recorded one conversation. I want to be precise about this, because the recording was the piece that later mattered most. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into my investigation, I was sitting in the kitchen when Derek came in and sat across from me. He had a folder in his hand. He set it on the table and folded his hands on top of it. He said that he and Angela had been doing a lot of thinking. He said they were concerned. He used the word confused 3 times when describing things he claimed I had forgotten, things I had no memory of forgetting because they had never happened. He slid the folder toward me and said it was just some paperwork that would allow Angela to help manage my affairs going forward. Standard thing, he said. A lot of families do it. My phone was in my shirt pocket, face down, recording. I reached for the folder with deliberately unsteady hands and squinted at the top page. The print's getting smaller every year, I said. What exactly am I looking at here, Derek? He explained it with the patient condescension of a man who is certain he is speaking to someone less capable than himself. It was a durable power of attorney that would allow Angela full authority over my financial accounts and real property. Full authority. His words. So Angela would be able to handle the house? I asked. Sell it? If it came to that? He did not hesitate. Exactly, he said. It just simplifies everything. I nodded slowly and said I needed to think about it. I told him I was tired. He squeezed my shoulder on the way out of the kitchen in a gesture that was meant to feel kind and felt like a closing argument. When his footsteps reached the top of the stairs, I stopped the recording on my phone and placed it on the table in front of me. I sat there for a while in the quiet kitchen. On the wall above the stove was the small wooden sign Maggie had put up 20 years ago, the one that said, "The best things in life aren't things." She had bought it at a craft fair, and I had teased her about it for a month. I would give anything to tease her about it again. I called Frank the next morning and told him we were ready. Angela's birthday was the first Saturday of October, which in Nashville is usually the best day of the year, cool enough for a jacket, warm enough to sit outside. The maples on Clover Ridge turning a particular red-orange that Maggie used to say looked like the trees were showing off. Angela and Derek had planned a long weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains to celebrate. They had invited me to come. I told them that a 2-night drive was a little much for my back, and they accepted this with the practiced sympathy of people who need you to stay home. They left Friday morning. Derek loaded the car while Angela hugged me in the doorway with the guilty affection of a person who has told themselves that what they are doing is ultimately for the best. I hugged her back. I held on for an extra moment because she is still my daughter, and because I knew what the weekend would bring, and because some part of me was still grieving the version of this story where none of it had happened. When their car turned off Clover Ridge, I called Frank. He arrived within the hour. With him was a woman named Pamela Osei, an investigator from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit, who Frank had contacted on my behalf the week before. I had spent 45 minutes on the phone with her, walking through my documentation, and she had arrived at the same conclusion I had reached, faster than I expected. She had been building a parallel case. Derek, it turned out, was not new to this. There had been a complaint from a different elderly homeowner in Brentwood 18 months ago that had been filed and stalled for lack of documentation. My file gave it legs. The three of us sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. I walked them through every document, every transaction record, every entry in the color-coded ledger I had assembled. I played them the recording. When Derek's voice came through the phone speaker saying it just simplifies everything, Pamela made a note without changing her expression, the mark of someone who has heard worse. When we were done, she closed her notebook and looked at me evenly. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you put together a cleaner investigative file than half the ones that come through my office." I told her I had been doing it a long time. She told me she would have enough for an arrest warrant by end of next week. She said the charges would include wire fraud, forgery, and elder financial abuse under state statute, with a federal enhancement possible given the nature of the lending fraud. She told me the process, what would happen, what I should expect. I appreciated her precision. When they left, the house was quiet again. I made a pot of coffee and sat on the porch in the October warmth, and I looked at Maggie's blue door for a long time. The irrevocable trust paperwork was already filed. The house was safe. The evidence was in the hands of people whose job was to act on it. There was nothing left for me to do but wait, and I have never been afraid of waiting. Angela and Derek came home Sunday evening. I had spent the afternoon preparing what I thought of, privately, as the closing presentation. In the living room, I had connected my laptop to the television. I had set the dining table with plates and glasses, because I had made dinner nothing elaborate. Just the pot roast Maggie used to make on cold evenings, the recipe from the index card in her handwriting that I had memorized over 40 years of watching her make it. I made it because I needed to do something with my hands, and because if the evening was going to be what it was going to be, I wanted it to begin with something warm. They came in carrying weekend bags and the slightly deflated energy of people returning from a trip that was meant to be a celebration and had felt, I imagined, like a waiting room. Derek dropped his bag in the hall and stretched his neck. Angela came into the kitchen and said the house smelled amazing, and she said it with genuine surprise, and for a moment her face was just my daughter's face. I told her to sit down, that dinner was ready. We ate. Derek talked about the cabin they had rented, the hiking they had done. He talked about the view from the ridge. He was loose, easy in his chair, a man who believed he had managed the situation and was now coasting toward the finish line. I watched him. 32 years of watching liars had given me the ability to see the performance underneath the performance, and Derek's was well rehearsed. After dinner, when Angela was putting the dishes in the sink, I told them I had something I wanted to show them, a little presentation I had put together. Derek smiled and said he didn't know I was tech-savvy enough for presentations. I told him I had picked up a few things over the years. I turned on the television and stepped aside. The first image was simple. On the left, a high-resolution scan of my actual signature, taken from my passport, the R with the small horizontal tail, the particular downward slope of the final E. On the right, the signature from the reverse mortgage application, smooth and clean and wrong. Between the two images, in plain red letters, I had typed one word: forgery. The room went completely silent. I heard the water in the kitchen sink stop running. Angela came to the doorway. The second slide was a transaction ledger. Every withdrawal from the reverse mortgage account. Every charge on the fraudulent credit cards. Each line item was labeled with a date, an amount, and a source. The BMW lease. The Memphis Hotel. 7 charges to an establishment called the Horseshoe Club over a period of 4 months. The total was at the bottom, in bold: $114,200. $114,000. I heard Angela make a sound I had not heard since she was a child, a small, involuntary sound of distress. The third slide was just the audio waveform from my phone recording. A title above it read, "Recorded Tuesday, September 23rd, Kitchen, 414 Clover Ridge Lane." I pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the living room. "It just simplifies everything." I stopped the playback. I had not looked at Derek since turning on the television. I looked at him now. The color had left his face in an uneven way, blotches of white appearing across his cheekbones and forehead. His hands were flat on his knees. He was working through calculations the way guilty people do. How much do they know? How much can I deny? What is the exit? There is no exit, I told him. Not because I was cruel, but because he needed to understand it before the next part happened. This is complete. The loan documents with your forged signature, the credit card applications, the transaction records, the recording. It is all documented, notarized, and in the possession of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation as of Friday. Angela said my name. Just my name. Nothing after it. And I heard in it everything she could not put into words, the panic and the shame, and the part of her that had known and had not wanted to know. "I want you to understand something," I said, and I was looking at her now, not at him. "I know you did not start this. I know there is a difference between someone who builds a plan and someone who convinces themselves to go along with it. That difference will matter, but it will not make this disappear, because I am not the one you need to convince." The doorbell rang. Derek flinched so hard he nearly knocked his chair back. I walked to the front door and opened it. Frank Bauer was standing on the porch in his good coat. Beside him were two officers from the Metro Nashville Police Department and a woman I recognized as a representative from the TBI's Financial Crimes Division. Pamela Osei was not there. She had told me her investigators would handle the procedural portion. "Derek James Calloway," one of the officers said, his voice completely even. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, forgery of financial documents, and financial exploitation of an elderly person under Tennessee Code 716120. Please come with us." What followed was not dramatic in the way people expect from these moments. Derek did not shout or run. He stood up from the chair and walked to the door as though he was moving underwater, and he did not look at me as he passed. Angela stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, and she was crying. And I let her cry because there was nothing I could say that was more honest than her own grief. Frank stayed. He sat with Angela for over an hour after the officers left, explaining her options, explaining the difference between her exposure and Derek's, explaining that cooperation would matter in a significant way. She had not knowingly signed any fraudulent documents. She had allowed herself to believe her husband's version of a plan, which is not the same thing as building it. The distinction was legally meaningful. Frank had made sure of that before any of this began. When Frank left, Angela and I sat in the living room for a long time without saying very much. I told her that the house was in a trust and would remain in the trust, and that no one was taking it anywhere. I told her that she was my daughter and that this was still her home for as long as she needed it to be. I told her that I was not willing to lose her over her husband's decisions. She asked me how I knew. She asked how long I had known. "Since the day I found the loan statement in the kitchen drawer," I said. "About 8 weeks. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked why I hadn't confronted Derek immediately. Why I had waited. Why I had sat at that dinner table every night for 2 months without saying anything. I thought about how to explain it to her. This woman who had grown up watching me go to work every morning to find the threads that other people missed. I thought about Maggie, who had once said that the most patient person in any room is usually the most powerful one. "Because confrontation without evidence is just noise," I told her. And I didn't want noise. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. Derek's trial took 11 months. I will not recount all of it. What I will tell you is that the federal prosecutor, who picked up the case on the wire fraud component, was a very thorough woman who appreciated the file I had assembled, and that the judge who sentenced Derek at the end of those 11 months described the case as a textbook example of financial predation against a vulnerable adult. Derek received 4 years in federal custody and was ordered to make full restitution of all funds drawn against my home equity plus interest. Angela cooperated fully with the prosecution. She was charged with 1 count of failure to report elder financial abuse, which she pled to, and received a suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. She came home to Clover Ridge Lane the day the plea was entered. I made the pot roast again. I have been asked whether I felt vindicated. It is an understandable question, but it is not quite the right one. Vindication suggests that I had been diminished by what happened and was now restored, like a balance sheet corrected to zero. That is not how I felt. What I felt, standing on the porch the evening after the sentencing, looking at Maggie's blue door in the October light, was something closer to completion. I had done the job. I had found the thread. I had pulled it until the whole false structure came apart. I had protected what was mine with the only tools I have ever trusted: patience, evidence, and the unwillingness to be what someone else decided I was. My son-in-law had decided I was a confused old man. He forgot that confused old men don't build color-coded fraud ledgers. He forgot that the person you underestimate most is usually the person who has spent a lifetime watching people underestimate exactly that. I went back inside. Angela was in the kitchen, and I could hear her on the phone with her cousin, her voice low and unguarded, sounding more like herself than she had in months. The pot on the stove was warming. The blue door was closed behind me. The house on Clover Ridge is still mine. The trust will remain in place for as long as I live. When I am gone, it goes to the Community Arts Foundation Maggie supported for 15 years, which is exactly what she would have wanted and exactly what Derek never saw coming. Some things are worth protecting at any age. Some people mistake your silence for weakness and your patience for confusion. Let them. The quiet ones are usually the ones who have been paying the closest attention. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had you figured out? How did you handle it? Share your story below. And if this one meant something to you, please like and subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from, and they all end the same way, with the truth, and with whoever had the patience to find it, still standing.